why Africans have been excluded from the internet governance agenda globally. And I'm not going to get into the details of the results of that work. I'm fresh off the report, submitted it last night. But there's quite a strong parallel between the exclusion as Africans in the internet governance agenda to the exclusion that we experience now with the cybersecurity governance agenda. Some of the findings were about the resistance to what would be termed a more technical subject matter. Some of the findings were around the dominant actors, the competing priorities that we raise as Africans to say when we solve water, when we solve electricity, when we solve these competing priorities, then we'll get to internet governance. And I think the same can be said for the cybersecurity agenda. It's something that we tend to put on the back foot. But this exclusion from the algorithm world, previously in the internet governance agenda, meant that many decisions were made that has produced for us the effect of digital exclusion. So we weren't there setting the agenda, we weren't there making the decisions, and we faced the current exclusion that we're experiencing. Had we been more prominent in the early days of internet governance, we could have produced a very different result now. And I think the same opportunity is presented on the cybersecurity governance agenda. There's been an initiative that emanated in 2014, the Malibu Convention, the African Union Convention on Cybersecurity and Data Protection. It's imperfect, it's incomplete, it's the start of a process, but it represents that coordination and cohesiveness that we've been asking for as Africans when it comes to topics that tend to be around algorithms and digital topics. It is that effort that says, as Africans, we can come up with a list of priorities on how we're going to tackle cybersecurity. So the convention itself lists how we're going to deal with legal certainty and confidence around electronic commerce, the kinds of institutional measures we should have for data protection, for cryptography. It speaks about how we're going to put in place the most basic measures for investigation and prosecution of cybercrime, as well as what we will need as countries in Africa to deal with cybersecurity at the policy and strategy level. And then most importantly, it speaks about methods of cooperation between countries in Africa and opens the door to cooperation between Africa and other continents on how we're going to combat cybercrime. Immediately, if this works, we should see, at least in the way that we are perceived in the rankings and matrix, some kind of improvement. And that's good for business, that's good for trade, and the rest should happen from there. So that's a little introduction to the African Union Convention. Within the sub-regional groups, within the SADC groups, ECOWAS, there's a similar attempt for coordination. But I'm making the appeal that has been made time and time again when it comes to the internet governance agenda, to everyone in this room and to your respective networks in Africa. Please, please participate in the cybersecurity governance agenda of Africa. It's not distant. I'm based in South Africa. The NEPAD office is based here. The African Union is within reach. You will be called upon to attend meetings, to participate, to criticize, to come up with suggestions and discussions, and take forward certain topics, and please do so. Otherwise, 20 years from now, there's somebody like me writing a report on why we've been completely excluded from the global cybersecurity governance agenda.
Thank you, Prea. Now you know why I was insisting on her being on the program, and but she's still, anyway, thank you for that introduction. Any comments from
May I actually?
yeah, Francesca?
Briefly, actually, thank you so much for your comment, and I completely support your call for more engagement. One comment related to the Cyber Readiness Index, actually, it is not a ranking system. And part of the reason why it's not ranking is because it takes into consideration the context of that country, and we don't see the value of direct comparison and ranking. Now, I've used examples from all over the world, because when we do identify effective mechanism, then I can point out not to some ideal benchmark, but to some some practical examples that are working, they're fixing, they're working. But we do not find useful this ranking. We can create benchmarks. It would be really interesting if after we finish the assessment of South Africa, we could do other countries in the region, so we could also encourage collaboration. That was actually one of the elements in the component of the Cyber Readiness Index that for because of time I couldn't get to, but diplomacy and trade and international cooperation is extremely important, and we would love to talk to you more about that in terms of South Africa. But the ranking, it's a really good point, and this is one of the reasons why in the methodology that we developed, we actually don't find it useful to rank countries against each other.
Sizwe, you got any comment?
Yeah, I think in terms of cybersecurity, for the last 10, 15 years, I think people like myself have been talking about it. We've been ignored a lot. Maybe because...
Ignored by whom?
Oh, well, I wouldn't want to say the government, because now I'm a civil servant partly. but those who are in power, let's put it like that, or those who can make things matter. They ignored us for a very long time, and now that things are happening internationally, now that our president has come up with the 4th Industrial Revolution, all of a sudden it's a priority area. So look, for me personally, I think forums like the one we're having here today, they're important forums. We share ideas, we get to think differently. I mean, I just looked at the last presentation, the one with the algorithms. Something to think about. I agree and I don't agree, but it is something that is there, it is a reality, and I think I agree with Prea to say that it's everyone's responsibility. Cybersecurity, like I said, even myself as a lawyer, it affects me at home, as a father, it affects us in all the facades of life. So we must really try and be ready, be it at a tertiary level, be it at workspace, be it at school, it is a reality.
Okay, I'm sure there must be some questions in the audience.
Can I just comment?
Yeah,
Can I just
go ahead,
comment? It is just very interesting. I totally agree with you that the governance, but if you take back about, I think it's about 8 years or 9 years ago, when they started and they did talk about the Budapest Convention, and there was some of the African countries that actually wanted to go into the Budapest Convention, but the African Union and the countries in the African Union actually decided that Africa will not be part of the Budapest Convention. And with the fact that we made that decision, we actually excluded ourselves to some of those things that we could have influenced if we stayed there.
Do you agree with that? That we excluded ourselves?
I won't speak to the historical scenario. I'm not familiar with it. But what I can say now is that from the recent meetings that I've attended is that there's coordination between the Budapest Convention requirements and the African Union Convention requirements. To date, we don't have a simplified document that we can access that is a nice comparative between the conventions to show where the areas of conflict are. But there is this working agreement to try and make sure that countries who accede to both conventions are not prejudiced by that decision.
Any questions, colleagues? Yeah. Let's take the one here, that there's up there as well, afterwards.
On that last point, Ghana has now acceded to the Budapest Convention. We are very agnostic as to which convention you belong to, but you are meant to belong to one. But I must emphasize the importance of what Francesca was saying about the ranking and index things. You have to be a bit careful with the ITU's GCI because it is revised every year, so you're not necessarily getting directly comparable results from year on year. And it's also largely based on responses from people in the country, and so if it's a ranking, there is a great temptation to say, oh, we're wonderful. We found in one of the African countries we visited that people were inclined to do that with our methodology until we pointed out that there was possibly some money coming along behind us, at which point they said, oh no, we've got these problems that need solving. So it depends very much how you ask the questions, what sort of answers you get. And the GFCE conference this year will be in Addis in October. So you're getting in the act.
Let's take Melissa here, then we go to this gentleman in the back.
So I had actually a few different questions. One is about the PAPIA and the cross-border data flows, and do you see challenges with cross-border data flows, just even in the region, and that might be impediments to digital trade and the digital economy as the country is advancing these particular items? And then to the broader group, if you could talk to some of the education and innovation initiatives that are happening. You know, Joni, we talked about at a break that there's like this 6-month or certificate piece that the government participates in gaining cybersecurity knowledge, and that we're moving toward a degree program. And that I learned yesterday that there's 50 innovation centers in this country, or initiatives that I would like to hear a lot more about any of those things and how they're intersecting between security and the fourth industrial revolution or the digital economy, and unpack those. Thank you.
Let's take the question in the back there, and then we throw it off.
Hi, my name is Stefan Swart from Majestic Data. So we, from the private sector, perhaps this is a lack of knowledge on my side or whatever, but I think what's important for me, so for us as from the private industry, if I may call it that, is that I want to walk away here today and understand what is our government doing about cybersecurity, etc. So there was a lot of answers, and I think there's little bits and pieces, but who glues this together? If you want to participate here, who do I approach and say, I want to be involved? We as a company want, we as an industry want to be involved, because everybody goes in their own direction here, which is understandable, focus areas, but who's the glue here? That's one question.
Please, Sizwe.
Okay. All right. Just have to start with a bit of a disclaimer. I'm representing me here, and not the office of the regulator. I need to make that very clear, so that there are no comebacks or telephone calls or tweets or whatever. It is my personal view that POPIA doesn't actually impede on the trans-border flow of information. I think it just makes it perfects it, it gives it order, and it puts in systems in place to try and avoid misuse of data. I mean, if you look at the sections dealing with cross-border flow of information, there are alternatives there. It's not so stringent. It's either a country that has data protection similar to that of ours, or if you have agreements in place with whatever organization that you're dealing with in that country, that you will respect data protection principles. You know, we had a big discussion in Accra 2 days ago to say, what exactly are data protection principles? What exactly is international best practice? And international best practice are the principles that you see in all of these laws. If you look at Convention 108, you look at the GDPR, you look at the regulations, you look at the UK legislation, you look at our legislation, there's a common thread there. It's those 7 principles, right? And as long as those principles are adhered to, be it contractually or in terms of legislation, then there shouldn't be any impediment in terms of trans-border flow of information. So I think it is a good thing. I think it is a way of also telling our private sector as well as government to get their houses in order in how they deal with information and how they share information. Like I said, it's my view.
Prea, do you have a view on?
I suppose just wanted to comment on the link, and I think the Minister also mentioned it this morning, that she saw cybersecurity as being one of the central themes when it came to the fourth industrial revolution and the digital economy-led objectives. And I think that that thread needs to carry through at every level. And Sizwe mentioned that in Papia there is that statutory intention that there should be balance in the way that we protect personal information, so that we should not undo any economic advantage from the free flow of information. And I think that needs to be carried through at all levels. But in order to entrench that, that's probably where the private sector needs to come forward, and it's linked to how we approach the Fourth Industrial Revolution policy setting and our digital economy policy setting, is that the arguments we make, Sizwe at the forefront as a lawyer, myself as someone with a legal background, only go so far in terms of the practical implications of some of the policies. And if private sector has to do anything, it is education and awareness on the implications, the economic implications of some of the policy decisions we make. So depending on who you're speaking to on a different day, the policy objective is either stability for the country, multilateral objective, a bilateral objective, gaining favor, and so on and so forth. So private sector should equally be persistent about raising the economic implications of the policy discussion. Theoretically, we learn about doing impact assessments for policies, but we don't do it. So private sector, please, that's where you need to come forward.
But private sector is asking, who do they talk to?
I think it's a good question for the government, yeah.
Currently, if you look at the NCPF or the cybersecurity policy framework, in the policy framework, if you read and analyze it, although state security is actually the person that, or government part that is responsible for the whole cybersecurity strategy, governance, etc., in the policy itself, if you're a private sector person, the best way to get into this is contacting Kiro at the Cybersecurity Hub, because the Cybersecurity Hub is actually the place where a government and private sector and all those people do work together. I know they've got regular meetings, etc. So if you contact Kiro and ask them to be part of that whole initiative, I'm sure they will include you there.
Kiro, do you agree?
Yes, but when shortened, the SCPF does mandate this, the cybersecurity hub as a national system for the private sector.
So you have your answer. Here's the mandate. Okay. Yeah, we've got, let's take there's a question here, there's a question from Jackie there, and there's a question in the back. Let's take the 3 questions first. I know we haven't addressed the other part of your question, but we'll get to that. Please.
Thank you very much. I thought the presentations were extremely interesting, but there was one in particular, and it's Dr. van Vuuren, which was, I was just wondering if it took me back like a couple of decades, I must admit. I didn't envisage that there would be, for me, what I interpreted as some kind of racial undertone embedded within the cybersecurity discourse. But the question that I have is that, was there any political response to that, to the data or the information that was made public?
Okay. Jackie there.
Hi, I'm Jackie Paslamhlaka from the CSIR. Thank you for the enlightening presentations. My first question, yeah, I'm a little bit guilty. I feel a little bit guilty for asking it, but I have to ask it. Joey just reinforced what Given also yesterday presented about the connectivity status of the country, saying that we are not that much connected, and perhaps we may not be as vulnerable. I say I feel guilty because from the CSR, I should be having the statistics, but there must be some statistics at the Stats South Africa which gives us some level of confidence. Why I'm worried, it's almost every family has lots of smartphones, children have got smartphones, and one expects that we are, because of that, just because of that, we are already well connected. What is the status? Can we go and just check what the level of connectivity is in the country? And then secondly, Prea, I'm not sure if you are interacting with the BRICS groups on internet governance. At some point I had an opportunity of interacting with them and being part of that, and there were a lot of political things there in terms of internet governance. The BRICS countries, of which South Africa is part, is talking a different way of governance. So I'm not sure if this, you are aware of those, levels and stages of interaction at the political level.
There's a question in the back there. Put your hand up, please. Yeah.
Caesar, I'd like you to put on your regulator hat now.
You're allowed to do that.
Okay, let me just ask the question, and then you can decide whether you want to answer. So it's based on that, the gentleman's question, that as the private sector, we want to get involved, we want to know how we can make the government aware, and we are engaging with some of the customers that we have. I know with us particularly, I'm Clara Onyebule from Amazon Web Services. I know with us particularly, we do have contact with Kiri and them. However, I personally feel if the regulator could talk to government, could write a paper that government can read, could do something, government would listen to us. Because when we talk, what you just explained, that we can take our data offshore, we are still told, no, we can't. So maybe don't answer, maybe think about it, or maybe answer, that maybe the regulator could help us by doing something as an engaging with government on Papua. Thanks.
I think I'll protect.
That's cool. I'll answer that one.
You'll answer that. Okay.
Surely I think the regulator will act if you write to the regulator and engage the regulator accordingly on the difficulties that you're having. If you would like, the email address for the regulator currently is inforeg@justice.gov.za. It will change soon because we've left Justice now. We've got our own offices in Johannesburg. You must remember we're an independent office. Therefore, we can act on things that are being said to us, complaints that are brought to us, requests for initiatives that are brought to us. And I can assure you, I'm currently doing outreach programs and stuff. That's why I zigzag the African continent and here as well. If we are requested to assist or to associate in any lawful activity in trying to gather up support from government in the right direction, surely we will support you. I hope that's not the politically correct answer, but that is the answer I'm going to give you.
Given?
Thank you, Prof. Just to Sizwe, in the US they have what they call the Cloud Act, which sort of all the companies that are from there are sort of forced to share the data that they have on their servers or from whatever country. And they're also saying that they would share that data with countries that they are friends with, or whatever the political term is. Now, one wonders how would we, there's a lot of our information on servers that are from foreign tech companies. I mean, that already makes it a bit tricky to sort of regulate. Now, the question there is it really, really possible to have control over our citizen data, given that many of the companies in the country, technology companies, are foreign? Now with that, I would also say that this is what I would have spoken about. As long as there is a dominance of foreign technology, chances of you being safe and determining what it means for you to be secured are very slim. And I would say that maybe that is what, if we were to protect and have the sovereign security, we need to work towards lessening our dependence on foreign technology. There's no other way that you can just work on other levels, especially the physical security. Our government is seriously into the whole mainframe, which is IBM. And when you talk about it, someone will tell you that it would be expensive to change. So we need to just, I think at the levels at which we try and talk about what it means to be secured, we need to reevaluate that and have a conversation, and I mean alone, that would definitely move us towards being secured. But can we really be safe with things like the Cloud Act and the vulnerabilities equities process and things like that? Thank you.
Sorry. Before Sizwe answers, can you just clarify something that Kevin has mentioned about the Cloud Act?
Okay, just take the microphone out. And we'll close that with the last comment there, because I want to try and give Given a chance. He didn't have a chance yesterday because he was called away. If I can fit you in the next session, just keep it quick. Then we'll try and do that, okay? Because you have an interesting point of view. Okay. Yes. Please.
So, Mark Palmer from Amazon Web Services. I just would like to clarify something on the Cloud Act. And that the Cloud Act is not something that gives government unfettered access to anyone's data. Service providers act as intermediaries. Law enforcement agencies can approach the courts and can approach companies for access to information. Companies will act within the confines of the law. And even when a law enforcement agency approaches a company for information, for example, Amazon Web Services, we have an obligation to our customers to inform our customers when such a request is made. A customer then can, if a court order was provided, a customer can then challenge that in court. In instances where we cannot notify the customer because the courts have stipulated that we cannot, we will still challenge it as a company because we have an obligation as a cloud provider to our customer. So the Cloud Act is not a mechanism that gives governments unfettered access to data. Okay. And we do not share it. Oh, yeah, sorry. We do not share it with our friends. I'm not sure who our friends would be in that space.
I don't think the question was meant for Amazon to defend themselves, no, but thanks.
But why we had to raise it, Prof, is because for Sizwe to answer that question, the question has to be raised correctly, because now you are giving information that is not correct, so the answer will be on an incorrect statement.
Thank you. I'm going to ask Anna Marie to respond first to the comment made about I think it's from about the racial undertones. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, that was actually before this other debate started. So what is very interesting to point out, if you search the term townships in South Africa, you get, for me, a much more accurate display on the Google image function, but it's specifically the term squatter camps in South Africa that's displaying the pictures of the white squatter camps. In terms of the official response, as soon as this started trending, I think the most vocal person writing about this was Ferial Haffajee, and she actually demanded from Google that they say why this is happening. Google at that point said no, but it's how the Google bot works, it's how the page ranks works. What they did actually is they had an event at Google in Johannesburg in which they invited a lot of experts on algorithms from internationally to come and speak about it. Ferial Haffajee spoke there as well. And they all said that the problem is the more you have sites peddling racism, and if you have sites captioning certain things in a certain way, that is going to influence the image results. I think what the penny just dropped for me, in a sense, much later when I spoke to my co-writer, is nobody at that stage spoke about how the data is actually having such a big influence. Everybody
kept on speaking about the algorithms, and that sort of inspired us in writing this. But this is not a new thing. There was already in 2016 a journalist for the Mail and Guardian, Rupia, saying that if you actually go Google a word like beautiful women, the Google images will also display mostly white women, making you think that the algorithm is racist. But Google says no, it's the way the data is captioned. It's because
We can give a comprehensive response to Melissa's question right now in terms of the education, but we will have a chance in Durban to probably delve into that a bit deeper. Okay, but if you can, some response to that. Can we start? Let's start with you, Joey, and then.
I must say, I missed out. What was the education question again?
The capacity in the different the certificates, the different programs, and then if you're moving ahead, as you're moving forward with the agenda that the minister spoke to today, how do you accelerate the programs that are currently in place?
Okay. What is very important here, hopefully by next year, the backlog of new qualifications due to the going from the old native qualifications to the new qualification structure that's starting, nobody can do any new native qualifications, no registrations next year. Therefore, there was such a huge backlog at the Department of Education, you couldn't get the new qualifications through. But hopefully from next year, it will definitely go faster for that education process as well, to get the new qualifications in. So I really, hopefully, I think in a year or two, because I know from other universities that also got new cyber qualifications in, but still haven't got the approvals for that, but hopefully it will come through in the next year.
But I think, Melissa, the short answer is our education system is not agile. It's a terribly bureaucratic process, top down. To get a new qualification approved, takes a year, 2 years.
Some of the qualifications that's starting next year was actually handed in 3 years ago. So it is really, and that's why I said, and it's also now a big backlog, but hopefully now the backlog will be taken off now, and from next year, but I still think it will take about 18 months if you look at the process.
But I think this also talks to what the Minister said about educating parliamentarians and policymakers about the consequences of their decisions. I don't think they realize that, and it's actually harming the country. Yeah. Prea?
I just wanted to respond to that ongoing issue about whether data sits in a country or whether it sits in other places. And I think coming from a legal background and aware of legislation such as the Promotion of Access to Information Act, POPIA that speaks about openness, that is similar to transparency, security safeguards, and so on. I think one of the questions we have to ask ourselves is whether or not we can put pressure on some of the levers around access to information, and access to information in the interest of national security, about the openness and transparency, about how citizens' information is being used, and the security safeguards that we mandate that shouldn't be equal to every single service provider, but should be assessed on the basis of what that service provider does. So it might sound complicated, but there are ways in using the legislation available to us to bring transparency, security, and access to data without oversimplifying it to saying that I want the data sitting within my borders. Because if we force that, we force the economies to change, and what we might see is that we'll have to explain to a citizen why they're paying 10 times more for a service, why it's so difficult to access, why it takes so long, and why there are additional things that they have to go through, maybe additional advertising and so on. So to avoid that, let us really strategically think about the other available levers before oversimplifying into let the data sit within my borders.
Regarding cloud services, it's actually a very interesting question, because when I got here, I was telling Prof.Maharaj about how I was battling to do backups of my work at the office, and how I had a reality check with my laptop that literally started burning in front of me, and I had to go and make quick means, take out the hard drive and connect it to another machine. So yeah, I guess the cloud is a important thing, but the cloud is not, they're not autonomous. They are within jurisdictions, and jurisdictions have laws. Laws are based upon policy. Policy is based upon politics. Politics is based upon people's actions and people's thoughts. Therefore, yes, if you are putting your information in a foreign country and you are suspected to be a security threat to that country, they are more likely going to go to court, get that court order based on public policy or public necessity, because there's a test between access and data protection. So I think it's something that service providers need to seriously think about, to say, where do we put our data farms in terms of giving people access to those? Because in terms of our current, should I say, our current political landscape on cybersecurity, one should accept that as much as the internet is borderless, and we've always said this over the years, there is now a cybersecurity sovereignty net, or a regional cybersecurity sovereignty net that people are creating based on politics. But it's a topic for another day. I hope my answer does not confuse you even further, but that's how I'm going to answer it.
Thank you.
Can I just give a quick answer to Jackie for the internet penetration rates? So we found that also depends on which statistics you're looking at. Jo and I were having this conversation. She said some of the statistics she showed today were from the ITU. The internet penetration rate we had in our profile for South Africa is actually based on the World Bank, and it shows South Africa as being only second to Morocco in the African continent. And he also calculated this difference between fixed broadband internet connectivity rate, so people having internet at home, and mobile connectivity, which you're absolutely correct. Most people have a smartphone. So we actually, and we'll compare our data, we see that the internet penetration rate is between 54-58%, only second to Morocco, and it's growing. If that's a positive, at least we can leave it on a positive note. Internet connectivity is definitely growing in the country.
Okay, I want to thank the panel. Just a last thought, and we're not going to have a discussion over this, but Antarctica has been declared by the United Nations as a territory that cannot be owned by a country. Why can't we put our data farms there? Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks to the panel.